Hey there, scholars. My name is Ira McIntosh, and this is Hypothesis. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to my office. It's time for another episode of Hypothesis. And today's episode was so much fun to record. My guest and I went off on a few buddy trails that I may or may not have had to edit out because this episode was very, very, very long. But be on the lookout. Those edits might be posted later. So be on the lookout for those on YouTube and TikTok because you never know. So please follow us there. Another little bit of business. If you are listening to the podcast, thank you. Please make sure that you download the episodes when you listen to them. Otherwise, the numbers don't count on the back end. And while I don't want to go crazy with ads on this podcast, I really would like to know how many people are listening so I know when it's time to maybe start up a Patreon with extra content or invite other people on to be part of this journey with us. So please make your presence known by downloading those episodes when you listen. And please share with your friends. That's why we're here. We're here to learn, and we're here to make sure that academia is available to everyone. And people know that PhD students and professors and researchers aren't just stuffy, mean people behind a desk. We're regular old nerds. So, that being said, today's episode, we talk a lot about feminism versus post-feminism. We talk about makeover movies. My guest is currently writing their PhD about several of some of my favorite films. So we really got to just kind of kiki and have some fun talking about movies. My guest today is Clementine Vann-Alexander, who is an early career researcher and teaching assistant at the University of Leeds, where she completed her PhD in film studies before, after, between, uncovering the abject in the Hollywood makeover film. Her work has been published in Frame Cinematic Journal, and she has presented research papers at national and international conferences. Clementine is currently preparing a book proposal on her thesis, as well as beginning new research into the dynamic tension inherent within the relationship between horror and beauty. She is particularly interested in screen representations of beauty, cultures of social and aesthetic surveillance, feminism and its incarnations and contortions, horror, and the representations of women on screen. Everyone, please help me welcome Clementine Vann-Alexander. The number of times I've had people send me their dissertations or their thesis, and they're like, don't worry, you don't have to read the whole thing. I'm like, you underestimate how much of a nerd I am and how much I want to read these things.
Oh my God.
Like in undergrad, I read, I guess not in undergrad, in my first master's, I read my advisor's dissertation, and she was like, why did you just why? Why? And like, because I now know you so much better.
Mm.
But yeah, so okay, so let's start this out. Could you talk a little bit about your journey in academia and how you got to the PhD, why you did a PhD, your topic, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, so to start from the undergrad, so my first degree, my BA is in Spanish,
Oh
um,
wow.
single honors. And I think something that I found that I really enjoyed as part of that was like the variety of topics that at least in the UK fall under a language degree. Like I got to study some art history, I got to do lots of theatre, I got to like do lots of literature and film. And I was quite lucky in that all of the modules that I picked, I really enjoyed. And like even still, some of the things that I learned in that BA I took through to my master's. I had like a bit of a break in between finishing my undergraduate degree and coming back to doing my MA because I was just kind of not 100% certain what I wanted to carry on doing. And I can remember having like a really nice, very supportive, loving conversation with my mum, and where she was like, "Well, where do you think you were happiest? Like, was it at university?" Which I think is a very nice way of saying, "Are you a huge nerd?" To which I think the answer was yes. And I did my master's in film studies, having decided that I was going to immediately try and get on to do a PhD afterwards. So I did my MA in the pandemic. I remember very clearly. So it was like starting in October 2020, at which point the United Kingdom was like in and out of lockdowns and regulations were changing really frequently. So I remember I met some of my peers on the course twice, a handful of times, and then everything was shut down again. And like all the learning was online. I still I really admire like the lecturers. I had a really good time. I do think that like it was obviously very difficult for everybody. But as part of that, before I had started doing the MA, and I think what led to me doing the PhD research that I have done is that I have like many teenagers, I was experimenting with my appearance. I was like playing around with makeup and dyeing my hair. And I started a job not long after I graduated in luxury beauty retail in a company that I
Ooh.
probably won't name explicitly. Not
That's
because
fair.
there's anything disparaging that I have to say about them, but just for the sake of privacy. And as
Hmm.
part of that, I realized that, and I'm a horror fan anyway. Like I was watching all these horror movies and just like coming of age movies in general. And I realized that like the way that some of these products are marketed and the way that some of the customers talk about themselves is just absolutely, it's heartbreaking. The kind of like
Mm.
insecurities that when you are supposedly put in a position of power where you ostensibly know what makes someone look quote unquote good and how to get them there, that like people will come to you with their hearts in their hands and they'll kind of plead with you about their insecurities and about things that they've struggled with, but also the way that they're made to feel by like all of the dominant structures of power, but also understandings of like hegemonic beauty standards, stories about things about aging, about like facial proportions and about their size. Um, and I kept sort of thinking about how these makeover narratives on screen kind of mirror that, where it's all this thing about like trying to make yourself better, to make yourself look right, whatever that might mean, and be right, but ultimately can wind up with everybody looking and behaving the same way to kind of all fit into this one standard. And that I had that gem of the idea in my head. And it was basically, oh, maybe I want to do my master's thesis about this, but I'm not sure I have enough yet. And so I kind of put it to one side in my master's. So I did my master's in film studies, and that was my dissertation was about like post 2000s horror cinema written and or directed by women,
Oh, wow.
which was really fun. Like I got to write about like it was kind of a very much thing of like these are the films that I like and I want to write about them. So it was like Prevenge, Gone Girl, The Love Witch, Ginger Snaps, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, and Jennifer's Body. I think that was all of them.
Nice.
A lot of
Ooh,
it, a
great
lot of it.
movies.
Yeah, thank you. It was a lot of fun just watching them over and over. But that, but the idea that I didn't pick, thinking about like, oh, where's this overlap between representations of beauty work on screen and horror? Like where, like what is it the nexus that I did? That then eventually blossomed into being the PhD about like the makeover film and using Julia Kristeva to think about the abject, which is essentially, I guess, like thinking about what it is that we don't want to look at. Like these films that are so
Mm.
concerned with, amongst other things, appearance and aesthetics, but are also at the same time as like what we don't want to be seen, what we don't want to see or what doesn't want to be seen, what is excluded. And that's
Hmm.
kind of it, I think, basically.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's such a fascinating topic and an interesting way to look at it too, because I mean, post-feminism is such a crazy thing, and I find, especially now on social media, with everything going on around Wuthering Heights and all of that, there's so many conversations where people are misunderstanding terminology and saying post-feminism or feminism and all of these things and not really knowing what they're talking about. And being able to kind of take a step back from that and look at it through the lens that you did, where you're looking at what is it about a makeover movie that we are subtracting? Like, what is it that we don't want to look at, and why is it that we don't want to look at it? It's a refreshing way to see it, especially through that lens of being horrific, like being monstrous. I don't think those are things that we often consider when we're talking about makeover movies.
Yeah, because I think that like, and the horror part is kind of, I'm really hoping to like, the thing that is next is develop like, because that's my chapter on Jawbreaker, the Stein movie. Like I really want to build that out more, and that is part of it. But I think one of the big reasons, and I remember talking about this in my Viva, about like trying to sort of reverse the polarity around, there is loads of really good scholarship about like gender, obviously, and gender and horror, obviously, and feminism and horror. But I thinking more about like reversing that polarity in terms of, well, what does that look like when we try and read films outside of horror with these critical lenses that are typically
Mm,
associated with it? And it's interesting to think about like that in terms of post-feminism and this idea of what we don't want to look at, this like as abjection prompts us to like physically and psychologically turn away from something that upsets us, um,
mm,
is when I write about miscongeniality, because that is the films that I've studied that most evidently concern itself with feminism itself and like the feminist
mhm,
projects. But the problem is that a lot of these makeover films, that when they try and directly engage with feminism, they're so out, they have to be really ambivalent about it in, I think, a very post-feminist way, where it's kind of, oh well, you don't have to be beautiful to like have romantic success or be successful in your job or be content, but it really helps. But also,
mhm. And
but also
also,
like,
don't you feel better about yourself
but don't
when
you feel
you
better?
conform?
Yeah. Or often that like the transformation of one's behavior and appearance and personality is directly what leads to success.
Yeah.
Um, and that might be because if you don't change, you're excluded and therefore you lose your job, which is what Andy is threatened with in The Devil Wears Prada, which is what Gracie is threatened with of miscongeniality, or you're excluded socially, which is what like Katie is threatened with in Mean Girls, and then obviously eventually does kind of in a way become excluded. Or like Ferd Mayo from Jawbreaker is a victim of really awful bullying at school. Or Mia from The Princess Diaries is also bullied. So it's kind of like as a means to survive this
Mm,
aesthetic transformation, and which is, I think, decidedly not feminist in its
yeah.
perspective. But there are still elements of this that like as like putting on makeup or getting your hair done can be pleasurable and enjoyable and like even for me from time to time like almost meditative or about as close to the meditation as I'm willing to
Yeah.
get right now. Like it is, it's still, you still have that feeling in the back of your head of like, I'm still consuming, I'm still like giving into patriarchy. Like, unfortunately, I can't help it. And I said the makeover narrative, I think, requires that ambivalence in order to exist. It can never, at least in its current instance within the realms of Hollywood, truly be feminist because by virtue, it's a narrative about an individual gaining success through consumption practices and
Yeah.
attaining a beauty standard.
Well, and I think that's a good point to make for anyone listening who maybe doesn't know the difference between feminism and post-feminism.
Yeah.
And that was something that I even was confused about until I went back and got my master's and started actually reading things, thinking that post-feminism just meant, oh, we've gotten to the point where we don't have to talk about feminism anymore. It's after feminism, but that's not what post-feminism is. What it is a theory expressing the idea that in order to attain feminist ideals, one must consume, one must partake in capitalist culture. And by doing so, by improving oneself, one becomes an empowered woman. Is
Yeah,
that, would you agree
yeah.
with that?
I think I would agree with that to an extent. And it's, I mean, like post-feminism, as you know from your own research, like it is confusing and people
Yeah.
disagree. Because it like it both is and isn't, it is that really ambiguous sort of way of looking at the world. I think
Mm,
there is a point in there where I try and argue that post-feminism figures feminism itself as abject in that it tries to
hmm
distance itself. Post-feminism tries to distance itself from feminism by saying things like, "Oh, feminists have gone too far." Like,
hmm
look at what they've done. Look at what feminism's done to men. Look at women who are childless and unmarried and unhappy. But at the same time, it cannot disconnect itself fully from the original political project. And I think that
hmm
the way that I try and when I talk about it to my students, it's very easy. No, it's not very easy, but it is easier to think about it in the terms of it's individualized. Like the idea of collective struggle is completely gone. It's every
Yeah.
woman for themselves. And it's this idea of, as you said, that you can buy your way and work your way to success. But the sisterhood, we have to leave that behind. We have to just fight for
hmm
ourselves.
Well, and because that's the only way that systems like we have, like capitalism, like patriarchy, that's the only way that they can get that it can keep women in a controllable space is by separating them, because
Mm,
feminism's work was bringing women together, finding places of intersectionality to be able to force the issue and to gain rights. And so in order to get that to go away, in order to get our world to a place where men can start taking away those rights again,
mm.
they had to individualize women. They had to strip away that feeling of sisterhood. And what easier way to do that than to make it shiny and glossy and pretty and put it in movies?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because I think in a lot of these case studies, and I think in coming of age films more broadly, particularly those that center on women and girls, friendship is a really vital part of those stories. Even in things like Miss Congeniality, where its plot is based around a competition in which women compete to be the most beautiful, the most congenial, the most intelligent, whatever. But at the core of that story is still the vital importance of Gracie undergoes this makeover, but that allows her to make friends with other women for ostensibly the first time in her life. Or that, like, within Mean Girls, there is so much infighting and backstabbing and scheming, but they do still kind of come together at the end, and the friendship is still important. And, like, there's that ambivalence again of, yeah, we have all this good stuff and we can all get on, but, like, nothing structurally changes. There is no, like,
Mm-mm.
great overhaul of any system whatsoever.
I'm not sure about. I know Mean Girls is Tina Fey,
Mm,
but I'm not sure about the other ones. I'm more familiar with TV directors, but so many of these storylines are created by men, created by gay men who see no other way to make a woman worth something than by making her spend money and show her worth via consumption. And it's such a frustrating frustrating thing to be faced with. The push for women to see themselves only as objects that need to seek approval in order to have worth is so damaging.
yeah, I think that the idea of, like, looking outside of approval is really interesting. I think especially if we consider, as you said, like, sort of that third wave feminism is like built on, like, being indignant and being angry
Mhm.
and kind of forcibly carving out spaces for oneself in private and in public to express that. But also, like, I think I'm assuming we haven't actually talked about this, but I'm assuming, like, Sarah Ahmed has been like an
Yes. Oh,
influence on
of
you as
course.
she is on
Yes.
me. And I think and I write about the her figure of the feminist killjoy in the introduction to the thesis, where, like, being willing to make noise again, like take up space, to be unpleasant, like to suck all the air out of the room, and dealing with that feeling of being uncomfortable, of drawing attention to oneself for your negative
Mm.
feelings, I think is I almost said it was empowering, but I think that's a whole other conversation. But it is something that I think that I would really encourage like anyone facing
Mm.
injustice to do. But that is, I think, a way that we might think about looking outside of approval to kind of quote unquote make oneself heard in a particular way. And obviously, depending on how one is marginalized or like the context in which that happens, that affects people differently. Um, but it is something that I think might be something that sort of we, or sort of those of us within the feminist project, should be looking to and thinking about more. I think about when um like I've been trying to get something done and like the value of being annoying and not being ashamed about
Mm.
being annoying um can work out. And I think that can be reflected in different ways in the research where like this idea of girl world, which is from Carlin, but it's in Mean Girls, and I talk about it when I talk about Devil Wears Prada, but it's essentially this idea of there is a brief moment of adolescence where, and I think this would very much apply to boys too, but we're talking about mostly women here, where
Mhm.
they're like allowed to be messy and more allowed, I should say, messy and transgressive and kind of experiment with their identities a little bit more and their social groupings before they are expected to settle down and become adults. And that is possibly another way of thinking about ways of being that aren't built upon seeking approval, where
Mm.
like you can embrace this period of change, of transformation, where even if it's still being cruel and breaking the rules, it is perhaps more acceptable that you are being annoying and being loud and showing your anger. And I think that is one of the good things that things like these coming of age or like makeover narratives in general can do, is that they are more they're really strong examples of those periods of experimentation with oneself, even if necessarily they aren't always opted into voluntarily by everybody. Um, and that is, it's difficult because they are both the person who undergoes the makeover is in theory seeking some approval from someone somewhere. But those
Mhm.
moments where like the post makeover identity begins to fall apart and kind of the cracks begin to show are kind of some of the most exciting moments in the film, I think, where there's that threat of like, oh my God, she's being loud or like her makeup smudged or, she's being transgressive in some other way, are, I think, very valuable and very much worth analyzing as well.
Well, and that makes me wonder about Princess Diaries specifically of your
Hmm.
examples, because that's one where at the beginning it almost feels like they're going into a fully feminist storyline where she's getting up, having to speak. Her teacher is being encouraging and letting her just sit in her uncomfortableness while she's trying not to throw up
Mm,
in front of the class, but then ultimately she does throw up and fails, and then takes that as a, okay, I guess I have to go along with this because I keep failing, instead of pushing through and saying, no, okay, if I keep failing, I'm going to find ways to get better. But then, to your point that you just made, it also, that movie more than others, like we see, I guess we see it a little bit in Miss Congeniality too, where everything else in their lives is made over, but their personality kind of stays the same,
yeah.
in that Princess Mia is quirky and awkward and falls over and doesn't know how to how to stand, how to sit. And those things continue through the movies, less so in Princess Diaries 2,
Mm,
just because she herself is getting older. So I think some of those things just kind of work themselves out as you get older, so it becomes less of a plot point. um but that one does really stand out to me a little bit more than the others in terms of their willingness to say, okay, maybe it wasn't the personality that was the issue. She still has to buy into this ideal, but at least this ideal is letting her personality shine through. And I think that's why that movie, more than some of the others, really kind of caught on and was such like a sensation at the time. Like
Yeah.
I remember Miss Congeniality coming out and people liking it, but it became more of a cult classic versus Princess Diaries. I remember even seeing it in theaters. Like we thought it was good enough to go see in theaters because of the acclaim that it was getting. And so it makes me wonder if that's part of it, that it had just a little bit more kernel of feminism in it than the others.
Yeah, and I mean, like she's being raised by a single mother, and
Hmm.
like the familial relationships. And I have not read the books. I had someone in my TikTok comments tell me about
I haven't either.
how the books are different. But like I am sorry, I'm a film study scholar. I largely consider myself I largely consider myself the material itself. But it's interesting to think about that the debate scene where I think that, and you raise a really good point that the teacher is giving her the space to kind of share her opinion. But it's interesting that in that debate, she is taking a pro stance. The issue they're arguing is like, should we all be made to wear school uniforms? And she's
Hmm.
arguing in favor of it, which is interesting that kind of the position that she's put on is to basically argue in favor of like authority from the top down should decide how we look,
Hmm.
and there should be less individuality. And you could argue that maybe that is also stirring up her discomfort, but then by the end, after the makeover, however, sort of she doesn't really like her personality doesn't change and she's kind of still very much like, heart of gold and she's very sweet. She does still like go into a royal family to rule a
Yeah.
small country in Europe. So she does still like again, like nothing changes. She doesn't choose to
Mm.
step away from her fate of becoming Queen of Genovia. Which I always want to call it Robonia, which is the made up country from Futurama when Bender takes part in the Olympics. Um, so yeah, like again, there's that ambivalence of like you've got to change, like that, as you said, like there's still something wrong with you to kind of make you better to fit into this role. And I do agree that there is like more of the kernel of feminism in there, but like to prop up a monarchy? Are we really saying that
Yeah.
like that's a huge feminist goal? But
I've never drawn that line between her argument in that debate and the fact that she becomes a royal, in that the whole movie she's advocating for authoritarianism,
well,
which
I mean,
is
I'm not
really funny.
I'm not saying that I'm sure she's a very fair and just monarch,
No,
as
yeah.
we saw from a royal engagement. And also it does mirror at the end when she does successfully make the speech at the
Hmm.
dinner and she's kind of become more assured in herself, um and shows no embarrassment around like who she is or her appearance. And I think that that is like like it's a really sweet scene and I think it is very rewarding as a viewer. But yeah, I think like the fact that the film ends where she's on the private jet, they're flying to Europe so that she can kind of cede the throne. Is that what am I? Hopefully, I'm using that phrase correctly. That she can kind of take to the
You
throne.
would know better than I
Well, well.
would.
For the viewers at home, I'm rolling my eyes. Sorry, listeners at home. Yeah, I think is something that's worth thinking about. And you do make a good point that like Gracie, in Miss Congeniality, like she does change her personality a little bit. Like she softens, I would say,
Mm,
but
yeah,
um, but not so much that she's completely unrecognizable as a character.
yeah. Versus some of the others where like Katie in Mean Girls is a complete 180 at the end. Like
Yeah.
she starts out as an awkward homeschooler, very relatable to me, and then becomes a cool public schooler. Like that's a very like 180 thing to happen to someone. And um I mean, she purports to go back to, or you can assume that she goes back to the original friends she makes at school, but there's
Mm.
no real follow-up, so we don't know that that's a fact. But yeah, it's there's no kind of redeeming, or not redeeming, but there's no kind of callback, there's no circle around to who she was at the beginning, to make her relatable in that way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and the thing about Mean Girls that I think really stuck with me as I was kind of watching it over and over and reading about it and researching is that I think that it is, when did it come out? 2000, 2004.
So long
It's
ago.
probably the most like it has such an outside cultural impact as a coming of age movie. The fact that there are, made for TV sequels, there's a musical, then there's a movie of the musical, like there's probably going to be a reboot at some point in the near future. And I do think that one of the reasons that it has that enduring appeal is its openness in very much depicting like every single one of us, regardless of how nice we think we are or our background, kind of have this capacity for cruelty and
Yeah.
manipulation. And I think in the thesis, I argue that this is all like, it means that we all have the ability in some way to both attain social capital, but also wield that social capital to kind of oust others. And
Mm.
I think the I think that the film draws a conclusion that's like that's just kind of the way things are, but it does mean that we can choose to be nice to each other at the same time. It doesn't mean that this is an inevitable. It's kind of like there will always be plastics. There will always be people who consider themselves to be at the top of the food chain and inflict that cruelty upon others, but you don't have to do that. Um, and I think, yeah, that is kind of, as you said, like the 180, the complete turn that Katie goes through in the film.
Well, I think it's an important thing to note too that I think that's another spot in which feminism and post-feminism are at odds. Is this feminism at its core requires at least a modicum of um socialism, in
Mm,
that it requires you to function in a society with other people and see other people as equals, versus post-feminism requires capitalism in order to function, and that you are ultimately striving to achieve something through it. It isn't just a theory for how you move through life. Like it's an actionable, here I need to do this in order for this to happen to me and for me to take charge of this. It how do I say this? It's like it gives you a way to grip the rungs on the hegemonic ladder. Like it's something that allows you to kind of climb up in society as society stands, rather than seeking to change society
yeah.
and to seek a higher position.
Mm,
But then once you've gotten that higher position, it, because of how you got there, there's no and I don't, I want to say there's a spiritual change. I don't mean that in a religious kind of way. I mean that in a like self understanding kind of a way.
hmm
And that post feminism doesn't require you to go through any sort of selflessness evaluation, so that
Yeah.
once you get to the top, you're still thinking about yourself. There is the opportunity to do great good, but because you've been trained by this system that you've used to get there, there's no requirement for you to not continue using that system.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean it's a not a similar argument to kind of, if you get rich, if you acquire wealth through exploiting people, you're not going to suddenly want to stop exploiting people so that you don't accrue more wealth. If if a system has allowed you to rise to the top of it and you've achieved individual success, like you're perfectly content, you risk so much more through like seeking to change that entire world around you. And I think that's one of the reasons why like I am very interested in what this Devil Wears Prada sequel is going to look like, because
Yeah.
that film ends with, oh, she doesn't like completely regress back to her before makeover self in terms of her appearance or really her personality, I would say. But like,
Mm-hmm.
why? If Andy is so, in theory, having left Runway to become a quote unquote serious journalist working for a newspaper in her leather jacket, why is she coming back? Why is she coming back to Runway? Like,
Yeah.
what is it about like the job market or whatever, like whatever scenario that it's going to be that is having her come back to this system, which not only hasn't changed, but I would say like if yeah, I'm assuming the film takes place like in 2024, 2025. Oh, sorry, 2026 or 2026. God, what year is it? Um,
I don't
not
know
only
anymore.
not only has like I think the world of fashion and fashion journalism not changed, it's like regressed. Like
Yeah.
it's gone
It's gotten
full
worse.
circle back to thin is in, a lack of
Mm-hmm.
diversity, ageism hasn't changed whatsoever. Like so it's I'm interested to see how the film kind of builds up this thing of why are we here? Why has Andy come back? What's going on?
I am also very interested, also just in, and I'm happy to go down this bunny trail for a second, in the what seems to be the portrayal of Emily's character,
Mm,
um, being now the CEO. Like she had a redemptive arc in the first movie. Like we see her come around to realizing she needs the people around her,
yeah,
and now it seems from what we've seen, it seems like she has gone back to that never mind, I'm a shark, gotta get this done.
yeah,
And then the repeated Miranda Priestley's repeated, who is this person, do we know, how do you know each other, like
yeah.
clearly trying to scratch out some kind of control in a system that she has no control in anymore.
Mm.
I'm very curious to see to see how this plays
I
out.
don't, maybe it's going to be like some sort of Uzumaki time loop where it just turns out that they've been repeating the same lives over and over and over again, which is kind of what IP reboots are, essentially, this idea
Yeah.
of regression. I'm so fascinated because I feel like there aren't that many details that I've come across
Mm-mm.
about this yet. But yeah, I really want to write about it when it comes out because I'm like, it is everything old is new again. Like, I'm sure that there'll be the similar jokes about people's weight, but
Of
maybe there'll
course.
be like a sort of semi-snarky tag afterwards to kind of be like, well, we know it's bad, but like so that they can still make the joke, which is something
Yeah.
I don't like. I don't like in comedy that kind of like just because you have a self-aware reflection of it doesn't mean that you're not making the joke itself.
Yeah, you're
Um,
still there. You're still in that space.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, exactly. Like Emily, like we see her in the hospital after she's been hit by the taxi. She eats bread and a chocolate mousse. Like that's
Hmm.
character development. She has
And she
carbohydrates
smiles.
and she
She
smiles.
smiles.
She smiles at the end. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe that was 2006, I think. So I don't know. The financial crash happened 2 years
Mm.
after Andy left Runway, and maybe everything fell apart after that.
And I mean, in the
Um,
magazine, there was my Seattle accent that just popped out. I haven't said it like that in a while. The magazine industry is completely crashed at this point. We're post Condé Nast really being everything that people want after the Bon Appetit
oh
scandal,
God, yeah, that's going back.
and Anna Winter stepping down just in
Yeah.
time for this movie to come out. So it'll be very interesting to see what references are made and how they handle the next steps in those characters' lives. I also similarly, obviously it's not even in pre, I don't think it's even in pre-production yet, but I know Anne Hathaway has talked about A Princess Diaries 3 and how all of them have been wanting to do a third one.
Yeah.
They're just trying to figure out a script because the person, I don't remember his name, but the person who wrote the first two scripts, I believe, passed away.
Is that
So,
no?
or the
Because
director that passed
Rob
away.
Marshall, Rob Marshall.
Yes. Thank
Yeah.
you. Rob Marshall passed away. So they're trying to figure out a way to do it that keeps it in the same visual vocabulary and the same feeling, um, without him, which would be very difficult. But I think that movie could be so poignant right now in a world where we are facing authoritarianism and
Mm.
fascism, um, to be able to talk about it in that and kind of light way. Like even in the second movie they had a lot of that, of just like, what is the role of a ruler, um kind of talk. And although I don't think they ever came into any useful conclusions, it still could be a helpful space for satire.
Yeah, I think so, definitely. And I think that like some of the when I was sort of putting the thesis together, like some of the most interesting talks that I went to at conferences or some of the most interesting things that I read were sort of people who were explicitly studying comedy and to think about kind of the role of comedy and cultural critique in American cinema specifically. And I do think with as in the same way that like the makeover narrative enables us to even if not consciously, sorry, have these conversations about like what is like an acceptable way of being? How do we feel about people who we don't think don't belong or don't fit in? And why do they have to change? And what can we or what can the characters kind of receive through coming about change. I think comedy definitely provides a similar thing to not only the kind of how do we laugh at something that is complicated, but also how do we help people find a way in to have those conversations about the thing, or at least think about
Mhm.
it maybe whilst they're watching it or after they leave the cinema or after they get up from the couch to get like more snacks from the kitchen in the streaming
I mean,
age.
and that's what the arts are for, or should be for, is creating space for conversations that are difficult to work your way into,
Mm,
or to disseminate new ideas, new theoretical ideas. I mean, that's how evolution came to the general masses as quickly as it did, was by being worked into books, and especially science fiction. um and
yeah.
I think if films and television aren't using their voices to ask some of those questions and to start some of those conversations, there's a problem.
Yeah, and I do think that is one of the reasons why like this thesis, aside from the fact that I've put 4 years of my life into into writing it, why it mattered so much to me is that I really enjoy all of these films, and I've had,
Mm,
especially in casual conversation when I've spoken to people about, telling them that I'm studying makeover movies, and I tell them what the case studies are, and I think people do make the assumption that I'm taking an adversarial position to them,
mm,
and I think
mm-hmm,
that's whereas I think ACCA fans are really common. Like people want to talk about the things that they're interested in and the things that they enjoy. And I do think that not only does the critical analysis of these pop cultural objects hold so much merit into understanding like where we stand or where we stood, because obviously I'm looking at stuff that's in the recent past, um, vis-a-vis like representation of gender, of race, of class, of consumption, like I think audiences and academics and everybody, like, you owe it to yourself to kind of have that critical lens that you sort of flip over the things that you like to unpick them a little bit more. And I really wanted to like spotlight some of these films that haven't necessarily been looked at quite in this way before. And
mm-hmm,
that's one of the things that I really hope to do, like as I hopefully move forward to like expanding on the horror stuff and talking about films
mm.
alongside, like the Jawbreaker chapter and other stuff apart from that. So we'll
Well, and I
see.
think just from a practical viewpoint, with a thesis or a dissertation or whatever word you want to use for it, from a practical point of view, you want to choose a top, or choose, if you're going to have films that you're watching, or for me, television shows that you're watching, you want to choose something that you're fine watching over and over and
Yes.
over and over
Oh my
again.
God,
I'm
100%.
honestly, I haven't even started my degree. I haven't even been accepted anywhere. Fingers crossed. But a couple of the shows that I'm going to have to watch, I don't like.
Oh
And
no.
it's going to be very hard. I don't like Sex in the City, and I'm going to have to watch it all the way through, probably a few times,
Mm,
and figure out a way to enjoy it, and find a way to like it.
yeah.
um because if I don't, I will go crazy. So
Yeah.
from a practical point of view, it just makes so much more sense when you're spending so many years on a very specific, very niche topic, to choose something that you enjoy,
Yeah. At
a
least like,
topic that you could not stop talking about,
yeah.
and examples that you are okay with watching over and over.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that was like when I was thinking about applying to do the MA to do the PhD, my mum put me in contact with a friend of hers who had done a doctorate in history. And I had a really
Mhm.
long, he was lovely. I had a really long conversation with him about it. And like some of the key pieces of advice that he gave to me were make sure that you like your supervisor as much as one can make sure that you like your supervisor before you apply. And make sure that you choose something that you don't think you're going to be sick of in at least 3 years, because otherwise it
Mhm.
will drive you insane. So good luck doing Sex
Yeah.
in the City.
Well,
Um,
I've had so many people tell me, don't choose a topic that you're too invested in. I'm like, I understand where you're coming from, because you need to maintain some form of objectivity, whatever that means.
yeah,
But at the same time, you have to be invested in it in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, you will go crazy.
yeah, oh yeah. And also there's a really good um I'm gonna paraphrase it because I can't remember exactly, but there's a really solid Annie Kaplan quote that's something like the feminist has to be concerned with the situation in which she finds the feminist critic has to be concerned with the situation in which she finds herself, which is like if you
Mm,
are watching all of these films, or like your peers are watching these films, or they are held up as important cultural objects, like it is worth taking the time for you to stop and look around and think about like how are these images or how are these films put together? Like what is being said here? What is being shown? And as always, what is not being seen, what is not being shown, what is being purposefully hidden away or left on the cutting room floor. I've been thinking about like time and like Angela McRobbie, who I can't believe hasn't come up
hmm
before now, but she talks about like
right.
the post-feminist dimension of time and
Mm,
how women in particular are like time is such an important part of our lives in the way that this does apply to everybody, but I think thinking about how women are told to kind of, they mature much faster, supposedly, possibly because of the earlier onset of puberty, but then also the way that women are discussed, time is
mm,
so much more of a relevant thing. Sorry, so much emphasis is put on like time as it's passing in terms of, I hate to say this, but like the in the 2000s, the countdown to certain actresses turning 18,
yep.
but also this idea of one's biological clock that keeps ticking, and then like how long it is before one becomes a crazy cat lady or a spinster. And I think that is something that I think about in relation to the makeover in terms of like the before and after is thought of as very linear,
Mm,
but the narratives of the films themselves often contradict that, where like the before will kind of rupture through and the old self threatens to break through like moments of excess emotion, for example, like thinking about like miscongeniality or in the Princess Diaries, even like when she gets caught in the rain, or like she expresses her frustrations after she's tracked down at the beach by the paparazzi, or even Jawbreaker, like which is really criminally underseen. I That is also one of the reasons I wanted to write about it because I love that film. It's absolutely ridiculous, but that is kind of the character that undergoes this transformation, then like is exposed for having like been like mousy and ugly. It's Judy Greer, by the way, who is absolutely beautiful.
yeah.
Um, and I
I
think
mean,
that
same
that
with Anne Hathaway, even in her quote unquote ugly state. It's like, this is still an obviously attractive person. Like,
yeah,
what are we playing at here?
yeah, and I think that is something where it's virtue of Hollywood casting. In order for the
Mm,
narrative to make sense, they kind of have to, and not to excuse any
mhm,
behavior, but like they kind of have to cast these already beautiful women and girls in the role because it's much easier to make the before make sense than it is to make the after
mhm.
make sense. I think particularly when in Hollywood, actors and actresses are so often praised for like uglying up or kind of making themselves
Yeah.
look a normal, like stripping away the glamour.
I mean, look at Charlize Theron in Monster.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Or like the suffering that Leonardo DiCaprio put himself through for The Revenant, for example. This idea,
Yeah.
or Mariah Carey in Precious.
hmm
This sort of notion of time and before and after, but the before kind of threatens us or threatens the make of a subject is a constant reminder of this thing that you thought was finished isn't finished, and you have to
And
keep
never will
working at it
be.
and never will be, and you have to keep thinking about your weight, you have to keep thinking about how you're looking, you have to keep thinking about how you're performing. And I think that is also quite post-feminist in its outlook of like there is no rest, there is only work and you accruing capital in like
Mhm.
monetary terms and social terms as well is like another element of I think the post-feminist politics of the makeover narrative, even though it quite often does not, it seems to attempt to elide actual politics in its representation.
Well, and partially because post-feminism is there and has been affected as a way through which we can sell
Mm,
things.
yeah.
And if someone arrives at an ideal, you can no longer sell them things because they've arrived. So therefore, we have to constantly tell people that this is an issue that you have to be thinking about every day. When you wake up, you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, what can I change about myself today?
Yes.
And
And
then
that,
what do I need to change about myself 3 months from now? Like
yeah.
it's if we ever arrive to that place, then we can't
Yeah.
sell you anything
If
anymore.
yeah, if perfection is ever attained, then that means that like the work is done and you can finally rest, but you can't. And I also think that that is reflected often in makeover sequences themselves, where and so for example, that opening montage in The Devil Wears Prada, where products are so often spotlighted. Now,
Mm,
this is a mechanic of filmmaking. Like you have product placement and you have sponsorships and you have, especially now, brand deals. But like back then, so much of the depiction of like the proper use of particular products was like a vanity full of bottles, and all of them have the labels facing towards the camera, so that not only is this a representation of like aesthetic labor, beauty work, whatever you want to call it, like the makeover process is a process of consumption, but it's like, are you using the right products in the right way? Like, here's how you can do it. And if you buy these, you can be like them too,
yeah.
is something that's also being represented.
It also allows for marketing tie-ins where you don't have to purposefully make things to go with the movie. You don't have to make action figures. You don't have to make Barbies. People
Mm,
can just go to the pharmacy and get Aquanet.
yeah,
Like,
absolutely. Yeah. I think that like, and that is something that I imagine undoubtedly will be a huge part of the Devil Wears Prada is like the sheer number of brand
absolutely.
collaborations that are going to be part of it.
It's gonna be crazy.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that you were talking about when you brought up Angela McRobbie and the dilation of time, um, I think is also extremely relevant right now because in a way it's what has led our society to be able to say that what is being unearthed in certain files
Mm,
that are being published isn't as big of a deal as it is, especially when we're talking about teenage girls, because teenage girls have been told for so long that they are valuable because they are old enough to be used and objectified.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
that you're so mature for your age thing has been a part of TV and film for so long now. And being able to, like you were saying, like women are being told that they have to worry about, and I mean it was around before post-feminism became a ingrained thing, but it has been monetized so easily because of it. But the you don't want to turn into an old maid idea has really expanded
Oh yeah.
and allows for people to excuse really horrible behavior.
Yeah, and I think that we can talk about this. Like, I would love to hear like people who research social media speak on this, and I'm sure that there's so much material out there about that in terms of like the complete collapse of tween as a category, like the
Mm-hmm.
rush through of like you turn 12 and then like you are expected to essentially. There's less of a space for play and fun and getting things wrong when you're being constantly surveilled by your peers, by systems, by social media, even if that
Mm-hmm.
means, and I mean that in terms of being as innocent as like your eyeliner looking a mess, or like
Mm-hmm.
trying to dye your hair blonde and it comes out orange. And so like this phase of experimentation that is in theory part of, this girl world idea, this phase of adolescence, as girls are kind of shunted from being children to adults immediately. And I think that does link into very much kind of objectification, this idea of like girls as things to be consumed and disposed of as
Mm-hmm.
currency, as like there are fewer spaces online and in person in which adolescence itself is actually allowed to
Yeah.
exist as as a defined category. And that is also like one of the reasons why I think these sort of social media bans are, are a bad idea because
No, I'm so in favor of them.
are you? Mm,
I'm so in favor of them. I mean, as someone who wrote their master's thesis about social media, um, these are systems that, and I mean, we're seeing this conversation come up a lot now that AI has become generative AI.
yeah,
But algorithms in and of themselves are a form of artificial intelligence. But that titling of them as artificial intelligence takes away the fact that it's just a facade that has people behind it programming it.
yeah,
Um, And if people are programming it, it is intrinsically biased. And that means that not only do we have very young people whose information is being monetized, being stolen, their data is being used, they are being exploited before they know that their labor is being exploited.
Yeah. No,
Um,
yeah, that's very true. Absolutely.
it's beyond the obvious reasons why anyone who is a minor shouldn't be on social media, because there are creeps out there who are going to use that content for their own gain.
Yeah.
um in the background of it, there's so much that needs consent, and if you
Yes.
aren't old enough to consent to an actual contract,
Mm.
you should not be allowed to consent to a social media contract.
Yeah, do you know what? That is a very good point. I think the things that kind of make me nervous about the blanket ban is that I don't think
Mm.
it necessarily, it kind of almost lets the apps get a, or let these platforms get away with it rather than like actually putting more restrictions on the platforms specifically. It then makes it an
Mm.
individual responsibility, which I do think is a problem. But you make an excellent point, and I can remember like being in a class and teaching Ignacio and Klein's data feminism and kind of thinking about algorithms of oppression for the first
Mm.
time. And like that kind of being eye-opening in a certain respect, because that's so far from
Mm.
like my research in my world, or like because these things are so like I have the evil device in my hand right now, that being my mobile phone, um, that like they're so part of everyday life that I'm speaking generally, but like aren't necessarily always what's what I'm looking for, incentivized to think about it critically or think about like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
they're like all of this coding is made by a person who thinks that kind of certain content should be allowed to be tagged in a certain fashion or should be pushed into someone else's feed in
Mm-hmm.
a particular way. Um, like I've spoken with my peers who have children who are older than me, and like I wouldn't want to be a teenager now. Are you kidding? It sounds
No,
awful.
absolutely not. Well, and the reason why Gen Alpha has and Gen Z and younger Gen Z have this idea of cringe is purely because of social media. We
Mm,
didn't Millennials didn't see that. Older Gen Z didn't see that. Gen X didn't see that. Boomers didn't see that. We didn't have this idea of the entire world is going to see me growing up.
yeah,
So therefore I have to always show my best face to the world.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that I kind of do touch on in my research because I think cultures of the makeover, I think, is a product of and perpetuates cultures of surveillance in that you like
Mm-hmm.
the individual is incentivized to surveil themselves. Like, am I looking right? What is my appearance? Like, how am I sitting? What am I wearing? Is something smudged or smeared that gives away that like, kind of ruins this illusion of being a perfected self? But it also incentivizes the characters to surveil each other and constantly judge each other to think about like who's included, who's excluded, like who is part of normal society and who should we basically shove out so that and in through excluding them reassure ourselves that we are normal and we're doing it right, whatever that might mean, and we're doing it well. And social media absolutely exacerbates that completely. I can remember like being like finding out about like snap maps for the first time, and obviously
Mm.
like find my friends that had existed for longer, but this idea that like through a bitmoji you can find out that all of your friends are hanging out without you, that's
Yeah.
awful. Yeah.
Well, and I mean that's a great point too, in that the makeover films are also teaching you that your best friends are the ones who are critical of you.
Mm,
And I think that's absolutely found its way into my own life as well as society, just in that we are so used to seeing friendships portrayed in media as, oh, they're constantly tearing each other down, telling each other what they need to do in order to look better, be better, do better,
yeah.
that we forget that friendships are really supposed to be there for support.
Yeah.
And we don't know, because we're not socializing in the same ways anymore. We don't know that it's any different than that. Like we have to take media's word for it because at least teenagers now have to take media's word for it because their childhoods do not look the same as childhoods have in the past. And I mean, even as a millennial, I was homeschooled, so I had to take media's word for it too, because I didn't have the same kind of friendships that people who went to public school did. I wasn't
Yeah.
socialized in the same ways. I still had friends, but it was a very different situation. Um, and so you create this incubator for a society that's expecting everyone around them to be judging them all the time,
Yeah.
and you're grateful for it.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
teaches you to be grateful for it.
Yeah, I mean, like, and I mean, on the one hand, you can connect that to like this idea of, is it Foucault, where it's like, wow, aren't schools like prisons, like kind of
Yeah.
thing, or like this idea of schools preparing you to be the ideal worker rather than sort of to being
Mm-hmm.
a well-rounded person. But actually, what you just said made me think of when I talk about miscongeniality, and I can't remember if it's in the article that I published through Frames or not, but like reading Judith Butler's Bodies That Matter and this concept of girling, this idea that a child is a child until there's the point where they become a girl, and like
Mm.
suddenly this yoke of expectations is settled upon them, and they're already doing something wrong. They're like, maybe this child maybe isn't sort of having certain hobbies or looking a particular way. So in Gracie's case is that, she's reading a book, she wears glasses, she wears like a big boxy red t-shirt, she's physically violent and like willing to confront boys versus like in that opening scene, that cold open, like the other little girls in the scene are all wearing like pastels or shirts with Peter Pan collars. Like it's very much like this child is already doing the concept of girl incorrectly and is basically excluded and made fun of because of it. And because that character then doesn't sort of again then perform woman in the right way, she's shown to be like physically violent, not doing well at her job, isolated socially, unsuccessful romantically, kind of a bore, kind of annoying. And then the makeover is like, well, like through discovering like dieting and waxing and being beautiful, yes, like there are positive things that come out of that, a successful romantic relationship, friends, community, a willingness, and she doesn't have to necessarily give up like her ambition. She doesn't have to give up her job, but she still very much is part of a, okay, now, is Gracie going to leave the pageant and just be like shaving her legs and waxing her hair and dieting for forever? Because as far as I can tell, there is no real world in which the makeover, at least cinematically, is completely undone. It is always, to
Mm-hmm.
some extent, maintained.
And I mean, considering there's a sequel to Miss Congeniality and she looks just as pretty and polished as she did at the end of the first movie, I think that gives us the answer.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, exactly. Armed and fabulous, and it's very
Yep.
important that we remember that. Not
Well,
a good
let's
movie. Not
Armed and
good.
Fabulous is a great way to segue into the synthesis questions. Yay!
Woohoo!
So this is a series of 7 questions that I ask all of my guests. Don't think about it too hard, just whatever comes to mind first.
Okay.
So question number 1, what is your typical executive dysfunction and or rest day activity?
Oh God, staring into space, wishing I was thinking that I really should be doing something else. Probably realizing that it's like 10:30 a.m. and I'm scrolling through TikTok on my phone. I do also I play a lot of video games actually in my spare time. Like I've started a new playthrough of Fallout New Vegas, which I'm really enjoying. Like I love Disco Elysium. I could talk about Disco Elysium until the cows come home. And also annoying my friends on WhatsApp, but then in kind not replying to their text messages, but being like,
Of
no, I
course.
know, like I'm not going to reply, but I will send you irrelevant stuff.
What is your favorite setting for working on your research?
Ooh, okay. It's a beautiful day outside. I'm in a gorgeous library. There are other people working around me quietly, which helps me become productive. Every book
Mm.
that I have, I don't need to go down into somewhere cellar to find, which is typical for me. Um, and there's like community peripheral to me, but I am able to like focus completely. And then suddenly 5 hours have passed and I've written an amazing piece of work. That never happens, but you know. Oh,
What is
and I've remembered to bring an iced coffee. I've not bought one. That's
yes.
important.
Oof. Yeah, I'm the same way. I have to be around other people who are studying as like a reminder of what I'm supposed to be
Yeah,
doing.
exactly. Exactly.
What is one thing an advisor has told you that has stuck with you? And this could be good or bad.
So I love my advisors. I told them towards the end of my tenure as a PhD student that I went into every supervision convinced that they were going to kick me out. And they would never do that because that's not how that works and they're lovely. But I was so anxious. I think genuinely be confident about being confident. Not only like I'm a pretty confident like face-to-face speaker, as I'm sure all of my rambling has demonstrated, but like on the page, reminding yourself that you are going to be an expert in your field. And so like
Mm,
don't bury your argument at the bottom of a paragraph. Highlight it, take it to the top, then work it in. Like actually state your claim. Like be bolder on the page.
like that. If you could choose any other area of research, what would you choose and why?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think it would be social media. I think I would.
Mm.
I think I would be an internet scholar or a games scholar, but hopefully the
Ooh,
second one will be part of my oeuvre in the near future. We'll see.
that's cool. I think video games need to be talked about academically a lot more.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, who is one other academic whose research you really admire? And I know we've shouted out a lot of names already, but
Yeah. Um, I'm looking at books behind my laptop, trying to think, like trying to literally remember a single name. I actually think I'm gonna say I'm gonna say Elizabeth Gross. Elizabeth Gross of I hope that's how you say your surname. I'm sorry, I don't know you personally, Elizabeth. Like volatile bodies has been so foundational for me in thinking about the way that I understand myself, the way that I read media texts. It is like one of those great academic books that is complicated and takes work, but it's so rewarding, like when you allow yourself to spend time with it.
mm, what is a question that you've never been able to answer?
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Oh my God.
I just can't picture the future. I can't.
Such
I
a
don't know.
triggering question.
Yeah. I think whenever it's like, so what do you plan for yourself? It's like, I don't know. I barely know what I'm gonna do in 5 minutes, let alone 5 years.
I don't have dinner plans. Stop asking me.
Yes, exactly.
And then finally, what font do you wish you could present your research in?
Oh God, that's such a good question. Um, I don't know. What do I use? I think I use Times New Roman. I do like Times New Roman, but I wish that I could present my research in. Um, okay. There's this one font called Super Woobly, which is just really wobbly, and I think it's fun. And I think that would be really add some whimsy to my research, and it would also add an element of unruliness to the text, which I try and
Mm,
talk about in my work. There you go. It's meta. It
nice.
synthesizes well with my work.
I'm hoping someday I get someone to answer that they want to use the Jane Austen font so they feel like Jane Austen writing her books. But I can't imagine writing research in that. And then where can people find you online?
People can find me online. I am on TikTok under at Clemmy is here. And I believe my Instagram handle is Clemmy is here as well. That's CLEMMIE is here. I am also available to reach at clemmy.bluesky, sorry, bsky.social. And if anything that I have said today is of interest to you, I do have a Substack that I occasionally write on called Scheming Third Wife. And I'm available to reach on all of those social channels. Come say hello, please. Be love to hear from
Amazing.
anybody.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And we will talk to you all later. Bye.
Bye.
A huge thank you again to Clementine for being a guest on the podcast. I had so much fun having this conversation with you. And I really hope that you all got something out of that and were entertained, but also learned about the genre of makeover films. I know I was working my hardest to keep up with Clementine in this, and I don't think I made it, but That's why she has the PhD and I don't. So if you would like to ask questions of me or my guests, we haven't had questions in a while, so please submit some questions. You can do that on Instagram at hypothesispod. You can send us an email at podcasthypothesis@gmail.com. Or you can send us an audio question on speakpipe.com/hypothesispodcast. That's speakpipe.com/hypothesispodcast. So please submit those questions. We would love to answer them for you. As always, you can find all of the articles we discussed on Substack. I don't know if we specifically talked about the articles because we got carried away, but there are articles pertaining to this conversation, and those will be on Substack. So check those out, iramcintosh.substack.com. You can also just search Substack The Gay Ethnographer, and you should be able to find those. You can follow all of our socials. You can find us, like I said, on Instagram at HypothesisPod or myself at Ira A. McIntosh. You can also find us on TikTok at The Gay Ethnographer and on YouTube, The Gay Ethnographer. There are a lot of other ones. So if you just type in The Gay Ethnographer or Ira McIntosh, you can find me pretty much anywhere. So please subscribe, rate, review, and share with your friends. We are a community here. We are not just a podcast. So please share with your friends and bring more people into this community so that we can learn more together. Let's fight misinformation together. Have a wonderful day and go read a book. Goodbye.